you are Olivia Krolczyk and Kaitlyn Wheeler, both ambassadors for the Riley Gaines Center at the Leadership Institute. I know that you both have experience with controversies within sports, specifically around the transgender conversation. So Kaitlyn, I'm going to start with you because I know that you actually competed with Riley and you both had to be exposed to some things you didn't exactly plan on as women, particularly in the locker room. So when it comes to the voices of female athletes and the voices of athletes in general, do you know if the Olympic Committee was considering those when they thought up this ceremony, or when the people who were behind it were thinking up this particular opening ceremony?
I mean, personally, I don't think that they were. I don't think that for the past 2 years, if not more, there has really been consideration for women. As we've seen, women have lost out on opportunities in their sports. And women's sports struggle enough as it is. We barely get the coverage we deserve. The funding for women's sports isn't as much as the men's sports. So no, I don't think the consideration has been really for the women here and for the opening ceremonies. It's really disheartening because it takes attention away from the athletes who worked essentially their entire lives to get to the pinnacle event, the pinnacle competition of their careers, and are now having that attention, that celebration of them being taken away by these acts that are being done at the opening ceremony. So it's really disheartening. It's disappointing. Someone who's dedicated myself over 18 years to sports, I would be infuriated to be an athlete there.
Yeah, and you're a multiple-time All-American, I know. And the fact is that there are a lot of people saying there's so much politicization in sports that it's obscuring the competition. And now it's all about the inclusion. So Olivia, I know for you, there was actually an assignment in college, right? Where you were, I don't want to say canceled, but you were called out because you used a term that a lot of us have used perhaps in the past.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I know all about the whole diversity, equity, inclusion, all of that. So, but in addition to, mocking the Last Supper at the Olympics game in that opening ceremony, we saw men dressing as women under the guise of inclusivity once again. And we know from the Bible that men dressing as women and women dressing as men is an abomination to the Lord. It's simply not okay. We would never see this kind of action happening to mock any other religion, would be, because then it would be an outrage. But it's ironic that an event meant to bring together people from across the world would deliberately choose to attack and mock the religion of hundreds of millions of people. It's simply not fair to, go ahead and do that and then take away the attention from the athletes, which is what this event is supposed to be about, and all of their hard work and showcasing their talents.
I'm glad you mentioned the faith aspects, because I think for a lot of people, anyone, including Riley Gaines, who stands up and says that this, is a mockery, or that allowing biological males to undress in locker rooms and to perform alongside women and to be deemed women in sports and in every facet of cultural life is merely religious indoctrination, that it is a one-sided argument, that it is old school, maybe, or antiquated. So what do you say, Olivia? You're a young woman. What are your friends saying, and what do you say about the faith aspect to this?
Yeah, you know what? I think we all kind of agree. It's not safe. It's not okay to allow these men into women's sports. It's not okay to be mocking religion. It feels like the whole Olympic Games has become something that it shouldn't be. It should not be about making a political statement in any aspect. It should simply just be about letting women compete against women, men compete against men, and the best of, and showcase really what they have worked for. And it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be, supporting your nation, supporting your team. And it has just completely not been about that. But when we need to, think about the safety of our women and men, of course, but we are seeing the Olympics Games allowing boxing men competing against the women. And that's something that we as viewers need to speak up about, because we know that these athletes, if they speak up, we already know that they are going to be canceled. They're going to lose their sponsorships. We know that they are going to be threatened. Obviously, Kaitlyn and Riley have experienced what it's like to be, pushed down and be like, if you say anything, here's what's going to happen. So as viewers, we need to be the one who to speak up for these athletes. And I think that's really essential right now.
I mean, how did this organization start for Riley to actually take a stand and, as you both have talked about extensively, risk cancellation and risk going against the grain culturally for what you believe in?
Well, it's exactly like, as you said, it's going against the grain. Riley and myself, after we went through what we did at the NCAA meet, especially Riley being, to having her trophy being taken away from her and given to a male, she didn't really have a resource to go to. There wasn't an organization or a person or someone out there who was a resource to women who have been in this situation. This is very new. It's very unknown. We really didn't know what we were supposed to do in that situation, but we knew it was wrong. I think the majority of coaches and athletes, officials, and the NCAA, I believe itself, knew what was happening was wrong. But the Riley Gaines Center, she thought up as a place where these athletes who have been affected by this gender ideology, not just in sports, but even Olivia in the classroom, in college, they've been affected by this, to come and have their voices heard, to be a resource to them, to be able to amplify their voices, because we see a lot of silencing through this whole thing. We were told that if we said something, we would lose out on scholarships, we would lose out on getting to grad school, we wouldn't get a job. And hearing that as a college student, that's the next big step for you, is to get a job. And so to hear that, it's scary, but it's really at the root of it, it's untrue. And so the Riley Gaines Center is a resource for all the young girls out there who maybe don't have a place or don't know who to go to. We want you to reach out to us because we want to help you through this. What's happening is wrong. It's unfair. And to let young girls and women know that their voices do matter. They do matter. And they're not inferior to men as much as society is now wanting you to believe.
It's very fascinating what I see. I mean, to think that it's courageous to speak up about your sport and to say, like your sister, Olivia, who was she kicked out of the YWCA? I mean, just remind people at home if they've never heard this story. Wasn't it your sister who said something and then she was no longer allowed to participate?
It was actually my sister.
It was your sister, Kaitlyn,
yes.
forgive me.
That's okay.
But this story, I mean, I'm just reading up on you both. Your sister said something. She stood up just like you did. And what happened?
Yeah, so after practice one day, her and her team, she was a swimmer herself, they changed in the locker room that was shared with the YMCA members. And she went into practice after swimming, and she saw two men changing in the locker room. And to see the shock and startlement of this, she went to her coach, she went to the YMCA administration, and she was told that there was nothing that they could do. And in speaking up about this and voicing her concerns for the safety of not only her teammates, but herself, she was kicked off of her swim team, no longer able to swim, and banned from a YMCA of all places, who, might I mention, their mission statement claims to be upholding Christian values. And by allowing this, they're obviously failing in that matter. So they're definitely taking an emphasis on the M in YMCA. We must have to bring back YWCAs.
What you mentioned the Christian values of that organization. Do you believe that Christianity is under attack?
I definitely do. I believe that especially comparing this to the opening ceremonies, there's a double standard when it comes to Christianity really versus any other religion or belief that society seems to shove down our throats now. And as a Christian myself, we've seen this type of discrimination not only since the beginning of creation, but in our popular culture, where Christianity and its symbols, much like what we've seen at the opening ceremonies, have been used in ways that are blasphemous. We see this constantly in our movies, TV shows, music videos, the list goes on. So to me, it's not surprising to see this in our organizations, in a public display at the Olympics. It's not only disrespectful to Jesus Christ, but how it takes the purpose of a YMCA to be safe in a locker room, or the attention away from athletes who have worked to the Olympics, or really the pinnacle of their careers. It's really disappointing. It's sick. it's sad, and we must fight back against it.
What, Kaitlyn, before I get to Olivia, what do you think about them saying that this was not supposed to be a depiction of the Last Supper, but supposed to be this Greek mythological figure and a feast, and that they've apologized? What do you make of that? Kaitlyn, I'll ask you first.
I think that I appreciate the apology, but I think when it comes to they know that this was very similar to the Jesus in his Last Supper with his disciples. Why would you even get as close as to blurring the lines between the two? Even if that wasn't the original intent, which I don't really believe that, it was so close that you would want to avoid any type of conflict, as we've seen happen in the first place.
And Olivia, I want your take too. I mean, we've seen something kind of similar to this at the LA Dodgers game. I want to say it was last year, but there were a couple of times that they had a pride night and they allowed drag nuns to go onto the field, and they gave awards, and it was a celebration of, again, inclusivity. But people were saying, you're mocking people of faith, you're mocking Christian or Catholic values. Again, the Olympic Games saying they did not intend to depict the Last Supper, but so many people comparing it to that and causing, a big stir. What are your impressions?
I think the fact that they apologize is them letting everyone know, hey, they were guilty and they got caught. If they truly did not think it was the Last Supper or supposed to mock Christianity, then they had no reason to apologize. But they knew exactly what they were doing. And it just doesn't make sense that you are hosting the Olympics, and the opening scene, you're going to choose to mock a religion rather than focusing on something to represent your country or represent what the games are all about. Instead of choosing something else that could be, reflecting of your country and your people, they chose to mock people from across the world. And it doesn't make sense. I think that they didn't really think it through, or they did really think it through, and they really wanted to mock people. It just takes a really sick person to be in charge of the opening scene and choose to do that. So I hope they have a conversation with whoever was in charge of that and either fire them, hopefully, or, prevent this from happening at future Olympic Games for sure.
Well, and Olivia, in terms of the future ceremonies, there is such and I don't know that it's going to go away, ensuring that there are voices, diverse voices inside of organizations and agencies and schools, et cetera, to make sure that people are represented. So what would your proposition be to an Olympic ceremony committee and saying, listen, we're going to put our female voices on your board or our Christian voices on your board, and we are almost demanding that should happen? Do you foresee anything like that happening in the future?
Well, I think part of the problem, you said something about, being diverse. I think the problem is we are too diverse to the point where we are excluding the majority, if that makes sense. Because we don't have Christians on the board. We don't have, the normal standard of people. I don't know if that makes sense, but we don't have the kind of person who will stand up and be like, hey, no, this is wrong. We only have diversity. We only have people who go against the grain of normalcy. We have people who are saying, no, it's fine to do that. And I think that one step towards that is making sure if we're going to be diverse, we're going to have every single person included in this conversation, not just your select minority of people who you want to be making those decisions, because that's not fair. So I think for future games, we need to hear from everyone, hear everyone's opinions, and discuss what we're going to do for the opening scenes, rather than just listening to a very few percentage of the population.
Well, Kaitlyn, and if so many people believe, as Olivia said, that there's this norm that should be in place in society, and that there might be a quieter majority of people who agree with what you and Riley are saying, why aren't more of them speaking up, and why isn't change happening at the tops of these organizations, including for the Olympic opening ceremony?
Well, I think it's all about what the media depicts. It's all about what the narrative that they're trying to push is. And so I think that the people that are in the majority, they may not realize they're in the majority because that's not what the media is telling them. They're focusing more on the very small percentage of people who actually support men and women's sports and want men and women's locker rooms and changing spaces. But really that's a small majority. We are in the majority. We know that in our country itself, over 90% of people agree with us. So really we are the large majority. We're just quiet. And it's time we're not so quiet anymore. We need to become the loud majority, because we've been seeing our freedoms being taken away. We've been seeing women's rights being taken away. That's ultimately what's at stake here. We've seen Title IX now be rewritten. That really eradicates the original intent of Title IX. I'm in a lawsuit with 17 other athletes who are fighting back against this rewrite. And ultimately what it's doing is it's erasing women. It's erasing our opportunities that women generations before us fought years and years and years for, being completely taken away. But I do see the tides turning. I do see people waking up. So I'm hopeful for the future. I'm hopeful that people are going to wake up. We're going to fight back. People are fed up with the nonsense, including myself. And so I'm encouraged to see more and more people waking up and taking a stance against this. So just letting those people that they're not alone in the fight.
Do you think that the choice by Paris's Olympic Opening Ceremony Committee to depict this scene, particularly with, people who were in drag or considered part of the LGBTQ plus community, do you believe that that was all led up to by the discussion of whether or not biological males should be competing in women's sports? Do you think that there was all of this, buzz about it, and that this was actually a statement being made and not just art?
I do believe it was a political statement. I do believe that there's a lot of undertones, whether they will admit that or not. This is something that they've been pushing now for years. That this idea of men can be women and women can be men. But frankly, that's just not true. It's not biologically true. And so, yes, I do believe that they are making a statement there. I think it's put a really bad taste in people's mouths, which is unfortunate, again, because it takes away the attention and the celebration of its athletes. But that's the problem, is sports used to be a place that was open to anyone and everyone. You didn't have to go into sports feeling like you were going to be discriminated against or excluded or just like isolated as a person. You were included. It didn't matter what your race was, your sex, your sexual identity. It didn't matter any of those things, because sports were a place for everyone. But now we're seeing religion now being isolated and discriminated against. So it's really sad that they're bringing this into sports, because there's really no place for it in sports. However, that's starting to change.
Olivia, your fight started in the classroom. And if you look at statistics, there are some that actually show that 1 in 4 young people, we're talking Gen Z or younger, identify as LGBTQ plus now. Do you believe that the conversations happening in schools around sports, but just around any facet of learning and enjoyment and growing up, are they actually centered more on this conversation towards inclusivity and towards maybe marginalizing the fact that, this is the new way and there's no turning back, and we are looking at a new horizon in terms of sexuality and acceptance?
I mean, I think it all starts in the classroom and on social media, but especially the classroom. I mean, we're seeing drag queens be brought into elementary schools to do drag queen queer study hour in elementary schools. So we are seeing this indoctrination happening at all these levels of schools. And they're talking about, this is what's okay. If you're normal, that's not okay. That's not inclusive. That's not diverse. And yeah, I think they are teaching people that, the future is going to be different. The future is going to be diverse and inclusive. But in doing so, they're being exclusive by telling women that you have to compete against a man. It is not inclusive. That's dangerous. That's unfair. It's a violation of the once original Title IX before it's being changed. And we're seeing these schools teaching people that it's not okay to be normal. And I've experienced it myself, being told that it's not okay to write about men competing in women's sports. It's not okay to talk about Riley Gaines' story. That's not inclusive. That's affecting your marginalized classmates. That's what I was told. I was told I was being transphobic. So I definitely believe this fight is happening in schools to begin.
And if I might add on to that, last I checked, drag wasn't a sport. So why not honor our veteran athletes who have been in sports their entire lives? Why not honor them Instead, we're turning an eye to drag queens, men dressing up and playing pretend as women. That has nothing to do with sports. So I hope that looking forward, I hope that future opening ceremonies will take this into consideration to avoid similar controversies and focus on honoring our athletes, and really focusing on sports, because that's what it's supposed to be about.
That's kind of a mic drop moment, but there's a couple of things that come to my mind. One is that Christians, greatest tenet is to walk in love. And so is there a fine line between correcting and making sure that culture and government and education and sports does the right thing and staying in this place of love? I mean, how do you make sense of that, Kaitlyn?
Well, Riley talks about this, and I absolutely love it the way she says it, because you can't have love without truth. That's where the word true love comes from. You can't have truth without love, and you can't have love without truth. So I think we're really focusing on twisting and manipulating what love really is, by lying to people. We're lying to people. We're lying to kids. Like Olivia said, it starts in the classroom. We're lying to them and telling them that they can be boys can be girls and girls can be boys. And that's not what love is. Lying to someone is the opposite of love. That is hate. And so I think we have to go back to the original intent of what really love is. Sometimes it's about telling the hard truths and for standing up for what is right. And that is truth. And that is loving people.
And in terms of hope for the next generation, I mean, I feel like I needed to ask it a little bit differently, because if more children, more young people are identifying as LGBTQ+, then what's your hope for the next generation, for them to understand what you all believe to be truth? And I guess I'll start with you, Olivia, because I mentioned it at the top in terms of your experiences in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I've noticed it firsthand that there are so many students, classmates, all these people around me who are identifying as LGBTQ. But if you have a conversation with them, if you're able to get to that point and they don't run away and call you a name, they don't know what they're talking about. They never have an actual argument. They just begin to attack you and what you look like rather than what you're saying, things like that. So it's really hard to see hope for the future, but seeing more and more people stand up, like me, Kaitlyn, Riley, a bunch of other girls across the nation, we're all starting to stand up because we're tired of seeing how this affects us, whether it's in sport, in a locker room, in bathrooms, in school, for me especially. We're tired of having this happen. We're tired of having to stand down and suppress what we want to say. We have the right to free speech. That's what once powered our nation to become what it is. So we need to bring back free speech, the debate, the right to have conversations with people without being called a bigot or a transphobe. And then I will start to see more and more hope for our next generation, because we have to turn this around, because I can't possibly imagine how much worse this could even get.
Well, and I don't know what that means, but I mean, we're going to have more conversations about this. This isn't going away. There are parents who are upset. Obviously, there are sponsors who backed out as a result of what they saw in these Olympic opening ceremonies. Kaitlyn, one more question for you. What were your thoughts when you saw the public demonstration of speaking out and getting loud, saying this cannot happen again and this was an abomination?
It was truly beautiful to see. I mean, on top of that, we saw athletes who have backed out of competing. We've seen athletes who have professed after their race or their competition and say that Jesus Christ is my Lord. And I really love to see that, to see them stand up for their faith, because I think a lot of times Christians are told to, be quiet, don't shove it down at people's throats, while we're simultaneously having to take what everyone else is shoving down our throats. So it was really beautiful to see. It was inspiring for me as a Christian to see, because people who love the Lord and stuff, we shouldn't be afraid to show that. We should definitely protect our beliefs. We should protect our faith, and we should protect God and not allow this blasphemy to happen on a world stage where it's not necessary or not a place to have it. And so it was really awesome to see that.
Blasphemy. Can you just define that? Because you used it a couple of times and people may not know what it means.
Yes. So it's like anything that is defying the Lord or defying biblical teaching or going against it in mockery of what the Bible says and ultimately what the truth is.
And for both of you, has it been worth it have you lost friends over these kinds of conversations? Have you received hateful comments, and has all of that been worth it to take this kind of stance that you're taking?
For me, I absolutely have experienced losing friends, losing family. I've been told I don't want to associate with a bigot like you. I had a family member tell me I tore the family apart all by myself. So it absolutely is very difficult to hear these things, to lose people who you thought were, a big part of your life, but clearly do not support you in everything you do. It's been so hard. But on the other side of it, I received so many messages from people saying, thank you for standing up for my daughter who wants to play in college one day. Thank you for standing up for my daughter who wants to be a doctor and go to college one day. And those are the messages that really keep me going, to know that I am fighting for the next generation. Of course, I'm only one person, I only have one voice, but to know that I'm reaching out and helping just even those few people, absolutely makes it worth it for me.
And Kaitlyn, I want to allow you to have that final word, because I saw Novak Djokovic, the tennis phenom, pulling out his cross from underneath his jersey and showing it following that depiction that caused so much outrage among Christians around the world. Again, very vocal. He's gotten into trouble for a number of different things and his stances. But for you, has it all been worth it? And are you more determined to speak out?
Yeah, every day I'm inspired to be more determined and hopeful for the future. It is scary speaking out and taking a public stance against something so, I guess, radical, and seems to be the majority when it's not. And thankfully, I haven't lost a lot of people. If I have, they've been replaced by people who are willing to speak truth to me, to hold me accountable, and just really overall better people. But these same groups who preach acceptance, love, inclusion, tolerance, they're the same people who are doing the exact opposite, and don't want to tolerate Christianity, and don't want to tolerate people who may have differing views than them. They're the exact people, as Olivia said, who don't want to have conversations. They turn away any type of civil discourse, which is really sad, because especially on college campuses, that's what we should be encouraging students to do, is to have these hard conversations and have civil discourse. Because once we stop having conversation, that's when people turn to violence. And we need to have conversations. We need to force these conversations, because if not, violence seems to be the ultimate result, and we need to make violence not an option here.
Well, we'll see if these conversations are enough to get the attention of the Olympic Opening Ceremony Committee. Obviously, they have seen and heard that they can't just do whatever they want, because they're getting so much backlash over this depiction, again, that they say was a Greek festival and revelry. And again, so many Christians saw it as you mentioned, the term blasphemy, and a degradation to a huge sect, billions of people who call themselves Christians. Thank you both, and thank you to the Riley Gaines Center at the Leadership Institute. We appreciate it. Olivia, Kaitlyn, our best to you.
Thank you so much.